I am Dungeon Master, your guide in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I am the Dungeon Master, and this is another episode of the Dungeon Master Q&A. We are rejoined once again by Bad Data. He is going to be helping us answer another question from the forums. This time, the question is 5th edition. My party has a crossbow man who routinely tries to shoot targets behind his allies, imperiling them. Since I didn't find a ruling for this in the Player's Handbook or Dungeon Master's Guide, the ruling that's been working so far is as follows. When making a ranged attack against a target behind another creature, the target is considered to have partial cover, -2 to hit. If the attack misses, it hits the creature between the shooter and target and deals damage as normal. This works for my table and has led to some tense, risky shots and mishaps. Out of curiosity, and for the sake of discussion, how do you rule trying to shoot around, over, or through allies? Now, there's a couple parts to this, so I think it'll be best if we just kind of break it down one by one. So let's start with just the first and foremost, and then we'll get to getting your opinion on that. But first and foremost here, it needs to be pointed out that there is in fact a ruling for this. It's in the Dungeon Master's Guide, Chapter 9, and it's cover. So, Bad Data, as you know, cover states that walls, trees, creatures, and other obstacles can provide cover during combat, making a target more difficult to harm. A target can benefit from cover only when an attack or other effect originates on the opposite side of the cover. And then it goes on to describe the 3 different levels of cover that you can have, but it also gives an example. For example, if a target is behind a creature that gives half cover and a tree trunk that gives 3/4 cover, the target has 3/4 cover. So it clearly states that a creature can provide cover and would in fact provide half cover. A target with half cover has a +2 bonus to armor class and dexterity saving throws. A target has half cover if an obstacle blocks at least half of its body. The obstacle might be a low wall, a large piece of furniture, a narrow tree trunk, a creature, whether that creature is an enemy or a friend. And so, it clearly has right in the rules that a creature provides half cover, whether it is your ally or the enemy's ally. If it is between you and your target, it is providing that target with half cover. So, just to clarify that there is a rule for this. It's not -2 to hit. It's +2 to the target's armor class, which might seem like semantics, but for certain effects and all of that, it might be important. And then also it gives the +2 to dexterity saving throws, which is important to remember as well for any kind of ranged area of effect target, like a fireball or something like that. They would have +2 to their dexterity if they were behind somebody else. So there's the official rule. Now let's hear from Bad Data finally and just see what he thinks about how they've been implementing this, and then what he does for trying to shoot around over or through allies.
Yeah. The first thing I gotta say on this is that it's interesting to see it actually addressed at all because, and this is what I take from experience for playing. I'd say I've been at least some 30 different campaigns over just like the last 3 years alone. And this is the number one way I see it dealt with at most table is not at all. People don't think about it in any way. When you shoot through the space occupied by another creature, especially because of the general assumption that a creature doesn't occupy its own space entirely, it's taken this sort of abstract way as to not impinge any kind of penalty at all. And this is in Pathfinder games mostly I've seen where there is soft cover rules that exist. But also I've seen it happen in 5e games. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just thought it was interesting to point out how most people don't even think about it.
Yeah.
Secondarily, in this specific case, I find the rule odd. And while I can understand the intent with which it exists, it's just very, very abusable in context. Because the attack, if it misses its intended target, automatically hits the other one. It is exploitable to guarantee a 100% hit rate if you target an enemy's backline, such that the only thing in the way are other enemies and other things like that. Now, I'm not saying that this is bad. Obviously, what works for a table works for a table. I'm just pointing out a design reason as to why I believe this is questionable. There are a number of ways this can be worked around for the player's benefit or to the enemy's benefit if you're feeling particularly nasty. I mean, it is a rule that affects everyone.
Well,
So yeah.
you'd like to assume that, but you never know how anything is being implemented, and there are dungeon masters and GMs out there who have rules that apply just for one or the other PCs or NPCs.
Yeah, I guess that's something you hear about. I actually don't believe I've ever personally been affected by that sort of GMsmanship.
Not under me, you haven't.
Well, definitely not. I'm just saying I don't think I've ever played with a GM who has PC or NPC only rules, with the possible exception of GMs who automatically declare enemies dead when they hit 0. That's a very common one.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. Yeah, in that sense, because of the way that 5th edition, has like enemies just kind of die when they hit 0 hit points, unless they're an important NPC for some reason. I do that whereas a PC always gets a death saving throw, obviously.
yeah.
And even in Pathfinder and 3.5 to a degree, although for my point of view, it was always just that, well, the enemy is dying, and once there's no more threat, people usually go around and finish them off.
Yeah, I'm stating, and it's not an observation you're in particular. I'm just pointing out, that's the one exception to the generalization I just made. Even in Pathfinder, where all creatures are equal under the rules, GMs still probably won't give monsters and stuff their stabilization times, even if they're living creatures with Constitution scores that would have, been afforded one under the rules. But I feel we're digressing a bit.
Yeah, quite a bit. So back to the shooting into melee.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, you bring up some interesting points about the design mechanics there, and indeed, whether or not it is a PC only rule does affect to some degree how exploitable this is, and whether or not it's a fair rule, or I don't know if that's the right word for it, but whatever you want to call it. Um, at the end of the day, I think that having it automatically hit is taking it a little far, especially because there is also an optional rule in the Dungeon Master's Guide that says that if you miss but would have hit if not for the +2 to armor class. So if you miss by 2 or less, then it can hit whoever was providing the cover if the roll was high enough to hit their armor class. So, I think that that's a much more balanced rule to implement. It is an optional rule. It's not one that you have to implement, but if you were to add a mechanic for hitting them, I think having it still have to hit their armor class at least is a lot better than, oh, you missed, so you automatically hit the creature in between.
Yeah. Which I can agree, especially because what I was talking about earlier about guaranteeing hits by firing to ranked enemies is on face not an intrinsically unreasonable prospect. It's just the rule as written made it too efficient. That's a much better interpretation of that mechanic, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And it still does give you quite a bit of benefit to try to shoot into somebody who has meat shields around them, because if it's all enemies, even if you miss, you might still hit, one of their meat shields, and that's great. If it is your allies, well, hopefully your tanks who are up there have very high armor classes, and so therefore when you miss, you're not um you know high enough of a roll to also hit your allies, because if your allies have, like, let's say around a 20 AC, most enemies are going to have below a 17 armor class, and therefore a roll of 20 and above is going to hit the enemy, and so you don't even have to worry about hitting your ally. And a roll of 19 or 18, which would be the two rolls that would miss but still qualify for possibly hitting your ally, can't hit your ally because they have a 20 AC.
Yeah.
So, there is a way to tactically go about, doing that, to where it's like, yeah, I could hit my tank, but he's got full plate armor on, so I'm pretty sure he'll be all right.
Yeah.
That
Excuse me.
that full plate armor and shield really, you know, stacks well, especially if you have something like an arrow catching shield.
Yeah.
So, just ways of mitigating some of the potential drawback of having the optional rule of being able to hit the cover. Even though it would apply to your allies, if you're smart about how you go about, building your characters and using your tactics, you either won't be aiming at your allies, or you won't have to worry about hitting them because their AC is too high to have to worry about that. So, just using the rules and the optional rules, you can already cover a lot of that. But now let's get into, the final question here, which is, for the sake of discussion, how do you rule trying to shoot around, over, or through allies? And obviously, if you guys don't know, Bad Data much prefers Pathfinder, so most of his, you know, thoughts on rulings for that will take that. But let's go with a fifth edition mindset here, Bad Data. Like you're DMing a fifth edition game, and you need to adjudicate shooting into melee around your allies, or maybe not even into melee. Maybe they're just in the direct path, like down a hallway. You know, how do you rule all of that?
Well, in context, especially given very expressly stated rules, I believe that if you're shooting through an ally space and assuming that the ally is the same size category as the enemy and not in a special circumstances or special circumstance, then I would grant the enemy half cover as it's described in 5e. I do believe that conditionally this could change though. If the enemy is, of course, a size category larger or more than the ally, then they'd be provided no cover benefit. Whereas if the enemy is smaller, they'd be provided 3/4 or possibly maxing out at 3/4. And with the final word, if the ally is squeezing or otherwise confined to occupy 100% of the space that they are in, then they'd provide full cover. It'd be impossible to shoot around them. I believe those are essentially all of the circumstances in which the rule would have to be implemented.
Yeah, well, that's basically exactly how I view it. Is it all comes down to size category and spacing as far as, you know, are you in a narrow 5 foot hallway where there's no real possibility of getting out of the way? Um, Especially like you said, if you're squeezing, you know, then for sure I would say, you know, total cover. You can't shoot around somebody who is, you know, squeezing through a narrow gap. But even if it's only a 5 foot hallway, I would say that creatures of the same size provide 3/4 cover, and creatures who are smaller would potentially be provided total cover then. You know, just because um, it's very hard to aim at a target that is moving around while trying to avoid hitting somebody who is directly in your line of fire, who's also moving around. You know, to time all of that out is pretty ridiculously hard. And then if the target is also now smaller and your allies just, you know, all in the way there, I would say that that would be enough to justify at the very least the 3/4 cover, but possibly even total cover. Um, yeah. Um, and the
It
same.
might be, I was going to say, I think it would sometimes depend upon the enemy's phenotype in that the general morphology. Because, like, it's generally a sound idea. But what if the larger target, the one providing cover, is humanoid? There's going to be a big gap between their legs. But if they're shaped like a slug or a naga or something, they're obviously going to provide full cover to a target much smaller than themselves. Just thought a note.
I think that there is some degree of, like, okay, a giraffe might not provide as much cover as you would think. Um,
Yeah.
you know, for being a huge creature, it just isn't really giving you the cover that you would want. Um, but at the end of the day, I think, um, you know, just being bipedal would not be enough for me. That's me. though somebody else might feel differently about that. Um, but I do think that there is some amount of uh, changing the degree based on overall proportions and all of that. But I think that it would have to be some pretty extreme, giraffe like qualities to make me have to adjust it.
I could see an argument for that. That definitely seems reasonable to me.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I think we've covered the actual rule and answered the how we adjudicate applying the variance to give some chance of hitting the allies, which I don't think I explicitly stated, but yeah, it comes down to exactly like the variant said. If you roll uh, and miss because of the cover, then the cover's armor class comes into play. And if you had rolled high enough to hit your cover, then they are struck, whether it is an ally or otherwise. And of course, the same goes for a structure or anything else that was providing cover, um, which, could be important at some point. If somebody's hiding behind a door and you're shooting fire arrows at them or whatever, or fire bolts, you might catch the door on fire. It's stuff like that could come into play based on missing due to the cover. But um, I think just having it automatically hit is, as you said, exploitable, and also against your allies, just a little bit harsh to automatically hit them. I mean, I definitely don't want to negate what this person says about this works for their table and has led to some great combat interactions. And if that's working for them, that definitely is something that they should continue to do. Then I just would caution anyone about doing that, because combats can already balance on a knife's edge between boring and TPK, and to add in that extra friendly fire automatically hitting when you miss, I mean, oh man, that could really tip the scales against you in a hurry.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, I want to thank you once again for helping us, answer one of these questions, Bad Data. I want to thank anyone who's watching, and as always, everyone, good gaming.